he grew up as a Hindu in India, in Orissa state. His father was a Brahmin, upper caste of the Hindu society. They had their own sadhu, as he called them, which would be guru in our terms. The father had his own private sadhu who came there and would do their astrology charts, tell him what days to go out and do business. The father owned a bunch of land which had been jungle or timberland and was, to my understanding, in the logging and lumber business. Rama, from the time, very young age, he was the oldest of, I think, 6 boys. The extended family involved also his grandmother, who lived there. The grandfather had died at a very young age, so the grandmother had to raise Rama's father by herself, and she was a very devout Hindu. She did sacrifices at their temple. She drank dung water as a sacrifice that her son would be raised as a holy man or whatever. And so he tells all these stories about his Hindu past and things like this, which is kind of a romantic way of incorporating this Eastern kind of philosophy into the Christian realm that he actually believed in, that we were in. So he told about his upbringing. He said his father was very strict, but his father was away all the time on business trips. And so he was raised mainly by his mother and his grandmother. And his grandmother was an authority figure who would go and tattle on him to his father when his father would come home from the business trips. And so the father would discipline him when he came home from these business trips. If he hadn't studied, he was told, this is an example that he gave all the time. And as I tell this story, you can see the parallels to how Rama was raised and what he did to our children and to us. His father would draw a circle in the sand and tell Rama to sit down there from the time he was a little boy and park in that circle and study. He'd give him a book and he had to study there all day long. And then Rama was sent at a very early age to a boarding school. So he wasn't even at home for several months out of the year. He stayed at this boarding school. He told about getting up as soon as the morning star was visible, or however it worked in the sky, in the eastern sky, like 4 a.m. or whatever. He would get up, go to the river, take his bath, or the pond or whatever it was, take his bath, and then he would run to the temple with his robe on. And first he would go to the garden and pick jasmine flowers or orchids or whatever they were. Take these flowers, a bouquet, into the temple and sacrifice to the god, to the gods every morning. And then he would always pray to the gods that he'd be the top in his class and that he would study very well and things like this. So, and he would always brag, I call it bragging. He would talk about staying up all night, putting mustard and kerosene oil into his eyes and mustard oil, there's pepper oil and different things to keep himself awake at night, study all night, and he would go out, he would pretend that he was going out to the field to go to the bathroom, take his pitcher of water, and he'd hide a book under his robe thing that he wore, and go out to the field so he could get more time to study while the other children were sleeping in the afternoon for the S.I.S.T. or whatever they called it. So he always just emphasized how much he studied when he was a young man and stuff. And then he said when he got older, he was laying in the afternoon when nobody works on his cot, and a thought came to his head that if he was ever going to become a scientist, he dreamed about Enrico Fermi and Albert Einstein and these scientists, and he wanted to be a scientist himself someday. He thought if he's ever going to be a scientist, he had to get out of India, he had to go somewhere else. So he hopped on his bicycle and rode through the jungle, which you're not supposed to do because of tigers and everything else. Went to the post office, bought stationery and envelopes, and wrote letters to the American consulate, English consulate, German consulate, Russian consulate, and I don't know, one other one I think. Anyway, for papers to take tests or whatever, to try to get scholarships to go to those countries for higher education. He got the test results or the paperwork from all these different consulates, and he took tests in his province or whatever, and he was among the top students in his province or whatever. And so eventually he did. He won a scholarship. He chose to come to Columbia University in New York to go to college. His testimony by date, the first date that we know of is 1963. He was at Columbia University. He had, and I don't know how much time before that. If he came in 1962, he doesn't really talk about the time. And he does. We don't know how old he is. He doesn't. I don't think he even knows his birthday. We're guessing if at this time in 1963, if we analyze that he maybe was 17 or 18 years old at that time, but we have no sure date, then we can kind of put a timeline on how old he is now. But in 1963, while he was at Columbia University, he was totally a loner. He said he didn't go out walking. He would go to his classes. He spent all of his money on books, and he was a vegetarian, Hindu vegetarian yet. He would go to the cafeteria. He didn't know what the American food was, so he lived on fruits and desserts and things like that. And he wouldn't eat any of the other food because he didn't know if there was meat in it or not. He had his little picture of his Hindu god. He had his little idol that he had in his room, and he did his Hindu worship there. And when he did have to go out in public, he saw Christianity, he saw American society. He hated both of them. It reminded him of the Christian missionaries back in India who he saw do diabolical and bad things there. So one day, he was writing a letter to his father. In the letter, he was writing down that he was going to come back to India, start a revolt with the college students there, kick out all the missionaries, all the Americans, and turn India into a strict Hindu nation. While he was writing this letter, supposedly, what he tells us is that the room lit up and there was this glow, and there was this lighted being standing there. And this being's, the voice said to him, "Rama, why do you fight against me? It's too hard for you. If you follow me all the days of your life, I'll be with you. I am Jesus Christ the Lord." He said this electric charge went through him, and he realized at that time that God wasn't Buddha, wasn't Krishna, wasn't Muhammad. It was Jesus Christ, that there was no Trinity, there was only Jesus Christ. And from that moment, the spirit of revelation and prophecy, healing, and all these other gifts came over him. He said that shortly after that, he was riding in an elevator in an apartment building, and some woman had a heart attack or something. I don't know the exact story. But the voice of God spoke to him and said, "Pray for this woman." So he prayed for this woman, and she was healed. To whatever the exact story is, I don't know. But shortly after that, the voice of God again told him to go to Jamaica, and while he was there, he would meet the woman that he was supposed to marry. And so he went to Jamaica, and however the exact circumstances, I don't know, but he met an American missionary woman who he very boldly walked up to and said, "The Lord has made known that I'm supposed to marry you." And this woman accepted it. And right after that, they went back to India. They had a son and a daughter while they were in India. And then they came back to India after 3-4 years, whatever. While they were there, Rama's father totally rejected him because he had married a white woman, an American. He had become a Christian. And there was a third thing that I can't remember, but he had broken all 3 of the vows that he had set up with his father that he would never do. And so the father actually hired assassins to try to assassinate him. And he told about where he was in a room. These big men came in there, tried to beat him up, but he said the Spirit of the Lord came over him, threw them off of himself, and he got out of the room and got away. So he had all these testimonies of traveling around to different villages and preaching his gospel, and that the villagers would throw stones and rocks and spears and everything else trying to kill him, and he would escape from that village and go on to the next village. So he made it sound like the book of the Acts all the time that he was over there. His wife was from St. Charles, Minnesota, which is near Rochester, Minnesota, where the Mayo Clinic is at, and IBM, one of their main corporate headquarters. So he came to live with his wife's parents near St. Charles for a few years, and while he was there, he started preaching at some little group meetings and stuff around Rochester. He had before that time, from what I know, he had tried going into the Assembly of God Church and talking in some of their meetings from church to church, and he was able to do this for a while, but eventually his gospel, he talked against organized Christianity. He taught again the Catholic Church to him is the mother whore. All the other denominations are harlots, as it speaks of in Revelation. The Pope is the Antichrist, and right on down the line. So the Assembly of God was damned because of some of their practices and their doctrines, along with all the other churches. Well, they kicked Rama out. They wrote a letter among all the Assembly of God churches saying that Rama was never to come back to any of their churches, that they labeled him as a cult leader. So then he started going into this little group outside of Rochester. And that's where our group started from that. This little group was made up of kind of an evangelical, Pentecostal type of group. And some of the people that were going there were from IBM. They were IBM workers. One of the IBM workers had gone to college with a man in Mankato. So the IBM worker called this man in Mankato, told about that they had met this man of God, and the man in Mankato then set up meetings over there. Rama was invited to Mankato, and that's where the group started, as I know it, in 1975. Supposedly, the Lord led him to pick out this house near Shawano. He bought this house, which was built by a carpenter, building contractor, as a retirement home for this contractor and his wife. They moved to a different place, and Rama ended up buying that house. And that is where the compound was established and is still going on to this day, near Green Bay, Wisconsin.